She dumped her poor fiancé but was shocked to see him married as a billionaire. Anderson had bought the ring 3 months ago, back when he still believed that love could survive on ramen dinners and Sunday walks through free museums. He'd worked overtime at the file clerk job he didn't need, playing the role so thoroughly that even his own hands had calluses from the unnecessary labor. The velvet box sat in his pocket like a promise, and he genuinely believed that tonight, at the annual Anderson Gala, in the building his grandfather built, Nancy would say yes to forever. Before we get into the main story, let me know in the comment section where you are watching from, subscribe and share because I have more interesting stories to share with you. Anderson had rehearsed the proposal 17 times. In front of the mirror in the shower, during his fake commute on the bus he didn't need to take. He'd planned to do it during the slow dance, when the lights dimmed and the string quartet played something romantic. He'd imagined Nancy's face, surprised, delighted, maybe even crying happy tears. He'd been so sure that 3 years of shared dinners and whispered dreams would matter more than the size of the diamond or the weight of his bank account. He'd been catastrophically wrong. Nancy didn't even wait until they were alone. She saw him standing by the champagne fountain in his cheap suit, the one he deliberately bought 2 sizes too big to maintain the illusion, and something in her expression shifted from surprise to disgust so quickly that Anderson felt it like a physical blow. Marcus Chin stood beside her, all flash and no substance, and Anderson watched his girlfriend of 3 years measure the 2 men against each other and find him wanting. "What are you doing here?" Nancy's voice was loud enough to carry, and Anderson realized with sick certainty that she wanted an audience. This wasn't going to be a private conversation. This was going to be a public execution. He tried anyway, pulled out the ring box with hands that only trembled slightly, opened it to reveal the modest solitaire that had cost him 3 months of pretend poverty wages. "Nancy, I know it's not much, but I love you. I've loved you for 3 years, and I want to spend the rest of my life." She laughed. Actually threw her head back and laughed, and the sound cut through the classical music like breaking glass. "Oh my God! Oh my God! You actually thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence, too busy laughing, and Marcus joined in with the kind of performative amusement that made Anderson's hands curl into fists. "Baby, is this the boyfriend?" Marcus asked, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "The one who works in the mail room?" "File clerk," Nancy corrected, still giggling. "He files papers. That's literally his entire job. Filing papers." She turned back to Anderson, and her face was cruel in a way he'd never seen before. Maybe it had always been there, hidden beneath the smiles and the "I love you too," and the promises that money didn't matter. "Did you really think I was going to marry you? Did you honestly believe that I was going to spend the rest of my life eating at diners and shopping at outlet malls and pretending that we were going to somehow make it work? You said you didn't care about money." Anderson's voice came out quieter than he intended, and he hated how small he sounded. "How broken. I lied." Nancy grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter with one hand and Marcus's arm with the other. "I lied because I kept hoping you'd suddenly become more. That you'd get promoted or win the lottery or do literally anything that would justify me wasting 3 years of my life on someone who takes public transportation." She lifted the champagne, and Anderson saw what was coming but couldn't make himself move. "But you're never going to be more, Anderson. You're always going to be exactly what you are right now, a nobody in a thrift store suit who thought love was enough." The champagne hit his face cold and sharp, bubbles burning his eyes. The crowd gasped, then immediately started pulling out phones. Anderson stood there dripping, watching Nancy walk away on Marcus's arm, and felt something inside his chest crack clean through. Not his heart. That would come later, in the privacy of his penthouse when he could finally drop the act. This was his faith breaking. His belief that genuine love could exist, that someone could see past the performance to the person underneath. Nancy reached the exit and turned back one last time, her voice carrying across the entire ballroom. Lose my number. Forget my address. And please, Anderson, stop embarrassing yourself by showing up to places you'll never belong. The doors closed behind her with a soft click. Anderson stood in the center of the ballroom, champagne soaking through his cheap suit, holding a ring that suddenly weighed nothing at all. The crowd stared, some pitying, most amused, all documenting. By tomorrow morning, his humiliation would have 10,000 views. By next week, it would be a meme. He carefully closed the ring box, slipped it back into his pocket, and walked to the exit with his spine straight and his head high. He didn't run. Didn't hide. Just walked through the building he owned like a man who had every right to be there, because he did. Behind him, the whispers started. Poor Anderson. Pathetic Anderson. The man who thought love conquered all and learned the hardest way possible that it didn't. What none of them knew, what Nancy would learn too late, was that Anderson wasn't poor at all. And by sunrise, neither would Marcus Chen be rich. Anderson walked into the Anderson conglomerate headquarters at exactly 7 a.m., before most of the staff had arrived. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his coffee, did a double take at the man in the impeccable charcoal suit, and nearly dropped his cup. Mr. Anderson? Sir, we didn't know you were. Conference room. 10 minutes. I want Davidson there. Anderson didn't break stride, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floors he used to scrub as a teenager learning the business from the ground up. The executive elevator recognized his fingerprint, and he rode to the top floor in silence, watching the city wake up beneath him. Somewhere down there, Nancy was probably still asleep in Marcus's rented penthouse, dreaming of a future that was already crumbling. By the time he reached the conference room, his assistant had assembled the senior staff with the efficiency that justified her 6-figure salary. They stood when he entered, shock evident on every face except hers. Davidson, the events manager who'd personally called Nancy to invite her to the gala, who'd suggested she bring a real date instead of that file clerk boyfriend, went visibly pale. Mr. Anderson, Davidson stammered, I had no idea you were back in the office. We thought you were still on your sabbatical. My sabbatical ended last night at approximately 9:47 p.m. when my girlfriend threw champagne in my face at the gala you organized. Anderson sat at the head of the table, his voice conversational, almost pleasant. The same gala where you told her I was just a clerk who filed papers. The same event where you personally encouraged her to attend with someone more appropriate. The room went silent. Davidson's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. Sir, I didn't realize. I thought you wanted to maintain your cover. I wanted to test loyalty. Yours, Nancy's, everyone's. Anderson leaned back in his chair, perfectly relaxed. You failed. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. Your severance package will reflect your years of service, but your career in this city is over. I'll make sure of that personally. Davidson opened his mouth to argue, thought better of it, and left without another word. The remaining staff sat frozen, waiting for the axe to fall on their own necks. But Anderson simply smiled. The rest of you are fine. You didn't know who I was, and you treated everyone with basic professionalism. That's all I ever wanted. He stood, adjusting his cufflinks. Meeting adjourned. Someone find me the name of that waitress from the cafe on 5th. Grace something. I want her file by lunch. 3 hours later, Anderson walked into Grace's cafe wearing the same unremarkable business casual he'd worn during his disguise. She was wiping down tables, her uniform slightly too big, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked up when the bell chimed and smiled, that same genuine warmth he'd seen yesterday when she'd served him coffee and treated the homeless man with dignity. Back already? Grace asked, grabbing a menu. I'm starting to think you actually like our coffee. Best in the city, Anderson replied, sliding into the corner booth. He'd read her file during the car ride over. 26. Working 2 jobs to support her younger sister through college. No criminal record. No social media presence beyond a dormant Facebook page from 2019. She was either the most authentic person in New York or an exceptionally skilled actress. He was betting on authentic. Grace poured his coffee without being asked, remembering from yesterday. Rough night? You look like you've been through something. Breakup, Anderson said, testing. 3 years down the drain because apparently I wasn't rich enough. He watched her face carefully. Most women would ask follow-up questions about his income, his job, his prospects. Grace just shook her head sympathetically. That's rough. But honestly, if she left you over money, you dodged a bullet. My dad always said you can make more money, but you can't make more integrity. Anderson felt something shift in his chest. Your dad sounds wise. He was. Past tense. Grace's smile flickered. He passed 2 years ago. Left me and my sister with a lot of debt and a lot of good advice. She topped off his coffee even though he hadn't touched it yet. Anyway, you don't need my sob story. You need breakfast. Pancakes. Please. As she walked away, Anderson pulled out his phone and texted his assistant. Prepare a marriage contract. Ironclad prenup. Timeline. 6 months from today. And clear my schedule for the next week. I'm courting someone. His assistant replied immediately. Name. Anderson watched Grace laugh at something the cook said through the kitchen window, her joy uncomplicated and real. Grace Martinez. And this time, she's going to know exactly who I am before I fall in love with her. No more tests. No more games. He'd learned his lesson with Nancy. Now he was going to do this right. Anderson had exactly 43 days left to fulfill his grandfather's will when he walked into Grace's cafe for the 7th time in 2 weeks. The old man's terms had been clear. Marry by his 30th birthday or the controlling shares of Anderson conglomerate would pass to his cousin Derek, a man whose business strategy involved hostile takeovers and questionable ethics. Anderson had spent 3 years on Nancy thinking he had time. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. Grace was refilling the sugar dispensers when he slid into his usual booth. She looked up and smiled, that same uncomplicated warmth that had hooked him from day one. Let me guess. Black coffee and the blueberry pancakes. Actually, I need to talk to you about something. Anderson had rehearsed this 17 different ways, discarded all of them, and decided to just be honest. Mostly honest. I have a proposition. She set down the sugar container, eyebrows raised. That sounds ominous. It's unconventional, he admitted. My grandfather left a clause in his will. I have to be married before I turn 30 or I lose my position at the company. I have 43 days left, and I just got out of a 3-year relationship with someone who turned out to be, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. Not who I thought she was. Grace sat down across from him, which she'd never done before. Okay. And you're telling me this because in 2 weeks, I've watched you give free coffee to the homeless man who sleeps outside. I've seen you cover a coworker's shift when her kid got sick. You split your tips with the busboy even though you're barely making rent on your own. Anderson leaned forward, holding her gaze. I need to marry someone I can trust. Someone genuine. And I think that's you. She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You want to marry me? We barely know each other. I know you better than I knew Nancy after 3 years. The truth of it stung. I know what kind of person you are. That's what matters. And what do I get out of this arranged marriage? Grace asked, her tone careful but not dismissive. She was actually considering it, which meant Anderson had read her situation correctly. Desperate but too proud to ask for help. Your sister's college tuition. Paid in full. Your father's medical debts. Cleared. A comfortable salary for being my wife, and after a year, if we both agree, a clean divorce with a settlement that sets you up for life. He pulled out a folder he'd brought specifically for this conversation. It's all in the contract. No strings. No expectations. Just a mutually beneficial arrangement. Grace opened the folder, her hands trembling slightly as she read. Anderson had made sure the terms were generous without being insulting. Enough to change her life, not enough to make her feel bought. He'd learned that lesson already. Why me? She asked finally. You could marry anyone. Someone from your social circle. Someone who actually knows how to be a corporate wife. Because they'd want something from me. My connections, my money, my status. Anderson reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. You don't even know what I'm worth, and you still treated me like I mattered. That's worth more than any social connection. I'm a waitress, Grace said quietly. I don't know how to be married to a successful manager. I don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners or how to make small talk at business parties. I don't care about any of that. And he didn't. Nancy had known all the rules of high society, and it hadn't made her a better person. I just need someone real standing next to me. Someone who won't change when the money shows up. Grace closed the folder, and Anderson's heart rate kicked up for the first time since Nancy's betrayal. This mattered. She mattered. And he was terrified she'd say no. One condition, Grace said. You tell me the truth. Always. I don't care if it's ugly or complicated or makes you look bad. If we're doing this, we do it honestly. Anderson thought about the penthouse she hadn't seen. The company he actually owned rather than managed. The billions, not millions, that comprised his net worth. He thought about how he'd planned to reveal everything slowly, carefully, once he was sure she wouldn't change. But she'd asked for honesty. And unlike Nancy, Grace actually deserved it. Then you should know, Anderson said carefully, that I'm not just a manager. Grace's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means the building your cafe rents from? I own it. The company I work for? I own that too. My grandfather didn't just leave me a position. He left me an empire. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then Grace laughed, not cruelly like Nancy, but with genuine surprise. So you're rich, rich. Billionaire rich. And you've been coming here for 2 weeks, ordering pancakes, letting me treat you like a regular customer? I wanted to know who you were before the money complicated things. Grace stood up, and Anderson's stomach dropped. But she just grabbed the coffee pot and refilled his cup. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll marry you. She sat back down, her smile small but real. But I'm keeping my job until the wedding. And you're still tipping 20%. Grace had never been inside a store where the dresses cost more than her monthly rent, but Anderson insisted she needed something appropriate for their courthouse wedding next week. She stood in the doorway of Elegance, a boutique so exclusive it didn't display prices, and felt completely out of place among the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Anderson squeezed her hand once, reassuring, and guided her toward a rack of simple but elegant dresses. I can find something at a department store, Grace whispered, eyeing a black dress that probably cost more than her car. This is too much. You're marrying a billionaire in 6 days. Nothing is too much. Anderson flagged down a sales associate, a polished woman named Clarissa who approached with practiced elegance. My fiancé needs a wedding dress. Something classic. Budget is not a concern. Clarissa's professional smile never wavered as she took in Grace's worn jeans and café uniform polo, but Grace saw the judgment in her eyes. Still, the woman pulled several dresses and gestured toward the fitting rooms. Grace had just stepped behind the curtain when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Oh my God, what is she doing here? Nancy stood in the main showroom wearing head-to-toe designer labels that screamed new money. Marcus hovered behind her, looking uncomfortable in a suit that fit him too well to be his own. Grace peeked through the curtain and watched Nancy march up to Clarissa with the entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. That girl, Nancy pointed at the fitting room, doesn't belong in a store like this. I can tell just by looking at her that she can't afford anything here. You're wasting your time. Clarissa hesitated, clearly torn between two potential customers. Ma'am, she's with a gentleman who what? Took pity on her. Nancy laughed, loud and cruel. I know the type. Probably some mid-level manager who brought his girlfriend to a store she'll never be able to shop at again. Meanwhile, I'm here with actual money to spend. She pulled out Marcus's credit card. Anderson noticed it was already Marcus's name, meaning Nancy had moved fast after the breakup. So either help me find a dress for the charity gala next month, or I'll make sure everyone knows Elegance caters to people who can't even afford the clearance rack. Grace emerged from the fitting room in the simple ivory dress, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She'd heard every word. It's fine, she said quietly to Anderson. We can go somewhere else. No. Anderson's voice was cold, the same tone he'd used when firing Davidson. He stood from the velvet chair he'd been waiting in and walked past Nancy without acknowledging her, his attention entirely on Grace. You look beautiful. We'll take it. Nancy's eyes widened as she finally recognized him. Anderson? What are you? You can't afford. She looked between him and Grace, confusion giving way to disbelief. Wait, is she with you? She's my fiancé. Anderson pulled out a black card, not the regular American Express, but the invitation-only Centurion card that Grace had only heard about in whispers. We'll take the dress. And actually, Clarissa, how much for the entire spring collection? Clarissa blinked. Sir, that's 47 pieces. The total would be approximately. I don't care about the total. My fiancé shouldn't have to shop where people like her, he nodded at Nancy without looking at her, can make her feel unwelcome. We'll buy the collection. Have everything sent to this address. He handed Clarissa a business card that made her face go pale. And if Miss, he finally glanced at Nancy, his expression blank. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. If she gives you any trouble, bill any damages to my account and have security remove her. Nancy's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Marcus grabbed her arm, clearly recognizing the name on the business card even if Nancy was too shocked to process it. Nancy, we should go. That's Anderson, Nancy whispered, staring. That's M.Y. Anderson. He's a file clerk. He takes the bus. He can't. He's Anderson Reeves, Clarissa interrupted, her professionalism cracking into awe. Of the Anderson conglomerate. He owns this building. She turned back to Anderson, practically bowing. Sir, we'll have everything delivered by tomorrow. And Miss Martinez, please accept my sincere apologies for. It's fine, Grace said, though her hand was shaking in Anderson's. Can we go now? Anderson guided her toward the exit, his arm around her waist, leaving Nancy frozen in the middle of the boutique, surrounded by dresses she could no longer afford and a man she'd thrown away for a fraud. As they reached the door, Anderson looked back one last time. "By the way, Nancy, that credit card you're using? Marcus's father cut him off 3 days ago. It's maxed out, but I'm sure Clarissa will accept cash." The door closed on Nancy's face, going white, and Anderson finally smiled. Marcus Chen walked into Anderson Financial Group with the desperate confidence of a man whose world was crumbling but refused to show it. Anderson watched him through the one-way glass of the executive observation room, a space designed for exactly this kind of meeting, where the borrower couldn't see who was really evaluating them. His loan officer, Patricia, sat across from Marcus with a folder full of documents that Anderson had personally reviewed that morning. The numbers told a story of spectacular financial collapse. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming in," Patricia began, her voice professionally neutral. "I understand you're seeking a business loan of $5 million to cover operational shortfalls and outstanding debts." Marcus nodded, adjusting his tie, a Hermes knockoff that Anderson recognized from 20 feet away. "That's correct. My father's firm has some temporary cash flow issues, but we have significant assets and excellent credit." "Your father's firm declared bankruptcy 3 weeks ago," Patricia interrupted gently. "And your personal credit score is 512. You have 17 maxed-out credit cards, 2 car repossessions pending, and you're 3 months behind on rent for a penthouse you can't afford." She slid a paper across the desk. "Mr. Chen, this isn't a loan interview. This is an intervention." Marcus's face went pale, then red. "Who told you? This is confidential information." "This is a bank, Mr. Chen. We have access to financial records. And your records indicate that you've been living off credit and borrowed money for the past 18 months. Patricia glanced at the glass, and Anderson nodded. She could deliver the final blow. "There's also the matter of fraud. You claim to be a venture capitalist to multiple women, including Nancy Williams, using your father's company credentials without authorization." "That's not fraud, that's just—" Marcus stopped, realizing anything he said would only make it worse. Anderson pressed the intercom button, his voice filtering through the speaker with digital distortion to prevent recognition. "Mr. Chen, can you explain why you told Nancy Williams that you owned 3 properties in Manhattan when in fact you own nothing but debt?" Marcus spun toward the glass, squinting as if trying to see through it. "Who is this? I demand to know who I'm speaking to." "You're speaking to the person who decides whether you leave this bank with a loan or a police escort." Anderson's voice remained calm, almost pleasant. "I'm curious about your relationship with Miss Williams. You began dating her approximately 2 weeks after she publicly ended her previous relationship. Rather convenient timing." "I don't see what my personal life has to do with." "Everything," Anderson interrupted. "Because Miss Williams was previously engaged to a man she believed was poor. She humiliated him at a charity gala, threw champagne in his face, called him a nobody. All because she thought you could offer her a better life." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Tell me, Mr. Chen, when exactly were you planning to tell her that you're bankrupt?" Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this." "No, you don't. You're free to leave. But the moment you walk out that door, I'll make sure every bank in the city knows about your fraudulent loan applications. You claimed assets you don't have. You forged your father's signature on 3 separate documents. That's not just bad credit, Mr. Chen. That's federal prison." Marcus sank back into his chair, the bravado draining from his face like water from a broken glass. "What do you want?" "The truth. Did Nancy know you were lying about your wealth?" "No," Marcus admitted quietly. She thought I was rich. I let her think it because, he stopped, shame finally catching up to him. Because she was exactly the type of woman who would only love you for money, Anderson finished. How does it feel, Mr. Chen, knowing that the woman you stole is just as fraudulent as you are? Through the glass, Anderson watched Marcus's hands shake as reality set in. Nancy had left a real billionaire for a fake one. She'd thrown away genuine love for a performance of wealth, and now both of them were sitting in the ruins of their own greed. Patricia slid a final document across the desk. This is a payment plan for your existing debts. $50 a month for the next 30 years. It's the best we can offer someone in your position. $50? Marcus looked up, disbelief and humiliation warring on his face. I need $5 million. You need a reality check, Anderson said through the speaker. And now you have one. Take the payment plan or take your chances with fraud charges. Your choice, Mr. Chen. Marcus signed with shaking hands. As he left the office, shoulders slumped in defeat, Anderson finally allowed himself a small smile. Nancy had traded a king for a pauper and didn't even know it yet. But she would. Soon, everyone would know exactly what she'd thrown away. Patricia's voice came through his earpiece. Sir, Miss Williams is calling Mr. Chen. Should I let her? I want her to hear him try to explain how the millionaire life she thought she was getting doesn't exist. Anderson turned away from the glass. And Patricia? Make sure she knows we own the building where her new apartment is. I'm raising the rent tomorrow. Somewhere in the city, Nancy's carefully constructed fantasy was about to collapse. And Anderson would be there to watch every moment of it. Nancy discovered the truth in the most humiliating way possible. At the checkout counter of Bergdorf Goodman with 4 shopping bags and a credit card that declined 3 times before the sales associate quietly suggested she try another form of payment. Marcus had been dodging her calls all afternoon, claiming he was in important meetings, but Nancy knew avoidance when she saw it. She'd perfected the art herself over 3 years with Anderson. She found Marcus in their rented penthouse, the one she'd bragged about on Instagram, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops, surrounded by bankers' boxes and eviction notices. He looked up when she walked in, and the guilt on his face told her everything before he opened his mouth. We need to talk, he said, which was what people always said right before they destroyed your life. Nancy dropped her purse on the counter, the Chanel bag she'd bought with his card last week, suddenly feeling like evidence of her own stupidity. The card declined. All of them declined. Want to explain why your black card got rejected for a $2,000 purchase? Because it's maxed out, Marcus admitted, not meeting her eyes. They're all maxed out. Nancy, my father cut me off 3 weeks ago. The company declared bankruptcy. I've been living on credit since before we met, and now… He gestured helplessly at the eviction notice on the kitchen island. Now it's all gone. The words hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean, gone? You told me you were a venture capitalist. You said you had investments, properties. I lied. Marcus finally looked at her, and Nancy saw her own desperation reflected back. I have nothing. I never had anything. The car is repossessed. This apartment is being foreclosed on. The clothes, the watches, the restaurants, all of it was borrowed money that I can't pay back. Nancy felt the room tilt sideways. She'd left Anderson, dependable, loving Anderson, for this? She'd humiliated him in front of hundreds of people, thrown champagne in his face, called him a nobody, all to upgrade to a man who was somehow even poorer than she'd thought Anderson was? How much debt? She asked, her voice hollow. 3.7 million. Nancy laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. She'd traded a file clerk for a fraud, and the universe was making sure she knew exactly how stupid she'd been. I left him for you. I left Anderson for you. Anderson, who works in the mailroom? Marcus asked, confused. Anderson, who owns the building, Nancy corrected, the full weight of her mistake finally crushing her. Anderson Reeves. Of the Anderson conglomerate. The man I was with for 3 years was a billionaire testing me, and I failed so spectacularly that he watched me walk away with you, a man pretending to be rich while the actual billionaire pretended to be poor. Marcus went pale. That was Anderson Reeves? The Anderson Reeves. Yes, you idiot. And I threw him away for your fake Rolex and your rented Maserati. Nancy grabbed her purse, her mind already calculating. She couldn't stay here, couldn't be associated with bankruptcy and fraud charges. She needed to salvage what was left of her reputation, needed to find another man, a real one this time, who could give her the life she deserved. Marcus reached for her arm. Nancy, wait, we can figure this out together. Together. She shook him off, disgust replacing shock. You have nothing to offer me. You are nothing. At least Anderson was actually somebody underneath the disguise. You're just debt and delusion. She walked out without looking back, her heels clicking against the marble floors that would belong to someone else by next month. Her phone buzzed, a text from her friend Melissa about the Anderson Group's annual charity gala next week. The biggest social event of the season. Nancy had attended last year on Anderson's arm, back when she didn't know he was the one signing the checks. This year, she'd go alone. She'd wear the one designer dress she'd managed to buy before the cards maxed out. She'd find someone new, someone actually wealthy, someone who could erase the past 6 weeks of catastrophic mistakes. The city was full of rich men. She just needed to be smarter this time. More careful, more thorough in her vetting process. Nancy pulled out her phone and started researching the guest list, looking for eligible bachelors, for CEOs and hedge fund managers and tech entrepreneurs. She'd made a mistake with Anderson, an even bigger mistake with Marcus, but third time was the charm. It had to be. She just needed to find the right target before anyone else realized that beneath the designer clothes and practiced smile, she was exactly as broke as the man she'd just abandoned. And if she happened to run into Anderson at the gala, if she could just explain, apologize, make him understand that she'd been confused, that Marcus had manipulated her, maybe there was still a chance. Maybe he'd take her back. Maybe she could fix this after all. Le Bernardin was the kind of restaurant where reservations required 3 months' notice and a connection to someone who mattered. Anderson had called that morning and they'd cleared the best table by the window within an hour. Grace sat across from him in one of the dresses from the boutique collection, still getting used to the weight of the engagement ring he'd insisted on, a tasteful 3-carat diamond that caught the candlelight. She looked beautiful and uncomfortable in equal measure, which Anderson found endearing. I still think we could have gone somewhere less intimidating, Grace said, eyeing the 7 pieces of silverware flanking her plate. I don't even know which fork. Start from the outside and work your way in, Anderson said gently. And Grace, you belong here. More than most of the people in this room. He meant it. The dining room was full of old money and new pretension, people who measured worth in stock portfolios and vacation homes. Grace measured worth in kindness and integrity, which made her richer than all of them combined. They were halfway through the second course when Nancy's voice cut through the refined murmur of conversation like a knife through silk. Oh my God, Anderson? Is that really you? Nancy stood beside their table in a dress that screamed rental and jewelry that would turn her skin green by midnight. Marcus trailed behind her, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. His suit was the same one from the bank interview, which meant it was probably his only good suit. Anderson took a sip of his wine and didn't stand. Nancy. Marcus. His voice was cordial but cold, the tone reserved for unwelcome strangers. "Enjoying your evening?" "We have a reservation," Nancy said, though her eyes were already cataloging everything on their table. The Chateau Margaux 2015. The fresh flowers Anderson had requested specifically. The way the staff moved around them with the deference reserved for VIPs. "I didn't know you could afford a place like this. I mean, how much is Grace's salary helping with the bills?" Grace's hand tightened on her water glass, but Anderson covered it with his own before she could respond. "Grace doesn't need a salary. She married well. Right, to a manager." Nancy's laugh was brittle, desperate. "Let me guess, you saved up for months for this one special dinner? How sweet. Marcus and I come here all the time. We're practically regulars." The lie was so obvious it was almost sad. The hostess had looked at them with confusion when they'd arrived, clearly not recognizing them. "Is that so?" Anderson cut into his Dover soul with precision. "Then you must know Chef Rousseau personally." Nancy faltered for just a moment. "Of course. We're practically friends." "Interesting." Anderson looked past her toward the kitchen. "Because he's walking over here right now." Chef Rousseau, a man whose restaurants had earned 12 Michelin stars across 3 continents, approached their table with the kind of urgency that made nearby diners stare. He bypassed Nancy completely and actually bowed, to Anderson. "Monsieur Reeves, what an honor to have you dining with us tonight. I trust everything is to your satisfaction." His French accent wrapped around each word like velvet. "Exceptional as always, Philippe." Anderson gestured to Grace. "My wife hasn't experienced your chocolate soufflé yet. Perhaps you could prepare something special. For Madame Reeves, I will create a masterpiece." Chef Rousseau bowed again, this time to Grace, who looked absolutely bewildered. "And may I say, congratulations on your marriage. The staff is honored to serve you both." "Thank you," Grace managed, her voice small. Chef Rousseau straightened and finally seemed to notice Nancy standing there. "Ah, mademoiselle, are you waiting for a table? I'm afraid we are fully booked this evening, but perhaps I can arrange something in our café section." "We have a reservation," Marcus said quickly, pulling out his phone to show their confirmation. Anderson knew before the chef looked that it was fake. He'd had his assistant buy out every available slot for the next 3 months. Marcus and Nancy didn't have a reservation. They'd come hoping to get in as walk-ins and had been counting on Nancy's non-existent relationship with the staff. "I'm sorry," Chef Rousseau said, his tone making it clear he was anything but. "There must be some mistake. We have no reservation under your name. Perhaps you're thinking of another restaurant." Nancy's face went white, then red. "But I know someone who—" "You know no one here," Anderson said quietly, finally looking directly at her. "You never did. You came here hoping to run into people who mattered, hoping to fake your way into a world you don't belong in. But the problem with lying, Nancy, is that eventually people see through it." He stood, taking Grace's hand. "Philippe, we'll take dessert on the terrace. And please, charge Miss Williams and Mr. Chen for their time. I believe there's a minimum waiting fee for fraudulent reservations." As they walked away, Anderson heard Nancy's voice rise in protest, Marcus trying to quiet her, the hostess politely but firmly suggesting they leave. Grace squeezed his hand once they were alone on the terrace. "That was harsh," she said, but she was smiling. "That was justice," Anderson corrected. "She wanted to mock us." Instead, she got reminded that pretending to be wealthy and actually being wealthy are 2 very different things. Below them, through the windows, they watched Nancy and Marcus being escorted to the door. The chocolate souffle arrived moments later, perfect and decadent, and Grace laughed, actually laughed, at the sheer absurdity of it all. I could get used to this, she admitted. Good, Anderson said, because I'm never letting you go. Nancy had borrowed the dress from a friend who'd borrowed it from a rental service that didn't ask too many questions. The invitation she'd forged was good enough to get past the first security checkpoint, but her hands still trembled as she walked into the Anderson Group annual merger gala. The same ballroom where she'd thrown champagne in Anderson's face 3 months ago now glittered with twice as many people, twice as much wealth, and exactly 0 chances for someone like her to actually belong. But Nancy was desperate. Marcus had moved out last week after the utilities were shut off in their apartment. Anderson's apartment, she'd learned too late, with rent that had tripled overnight. Her credit cards were maxed. Her friends had stopped returning calls. The rich life she'd sacrificed everything for had evaporated like champagne bubbles, and she was drowning in debt she couldn't pay and a reality she couldn't escape. So she'd come here with a plan that was equal parts pathetic and predatory: find the CEO of Anderson Conglomerate, seduce him, and trade her way back into the life she'd lost. She didn't know his name. The man was famously private, never photographed, always behind closed doors. But he was supposed to make an appearance tonight, and Nancy was going to make sure she was the most beautiful woman in the room when he did. She grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter and positioned herself near the stage where the speeches would happen. Around her, people in actual designer clothes made conversation about mergers and acquisitions while she pretended to check her phone, hoping no one would notice she didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months ago, she'd told Anderson he didn't belong in this very room. Now she was the imposter, the fraud, the nobody in a borrowed dress. The lights dimmed and a woman's voice came through the speakers, professional and warm. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate the largest merger in Anderson Conglomerate history. Please welcome our CEO and Chairman, Anderson Reeves. Nancy's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor she'd once danced on. The sound seemed to echo through the entire ballroom as every head turned toward the stage, where Anderson, the file clerk, the nobody, the man she called a loser, walked out in a tuxedo that cost more than her entire year's rent. He looked different, confident, powerful, like he'd been wearing a mask for 3 years and had finally taken it off. Grace walked beside him in a stunning emerald gown, her hand tucked into his arm, a wedding band glinting on her finger that made Nancy's stomach turn. They looked like they belonged together, like they'd been carved from the same expensive marble as the building itself. Thank you all for being here, Anderson's voice carried across the ballroom with the easy authority of someone who'd always known he owned everything in it. Tonight marks a significant milestone for Anderson Conglomerate, but more importantly, it marks a personal milestone for me. 3 months ago, I learned a valuable lesson about the difference between love and ambition, between character and performance. His eyes found Nancy in the crowd, standing frozen beside her shattered glass, and she felt like she might throw up. I learned that the right person will love you for who you are, not what you have. My wife Grace taught me that. He turned to Grace, kissing her hand with a tenderness that Nancy had never seen from him in 3 years together. She married me believing I was a manager making $70,000 a year. She never asked for more. She never needed more. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Nancy wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but here. But tonight isn't about personal revelations. Tonight is about business. Anderson pulled out a remote and the screens behind him lit up with the merger details. Anderson Conglomerate has acquired Chen Industries for $1. The company was valued at -$50 million due to fraud, embezzlement, and criminal mismanagement by its former CEO, Marcus Chen Sr., and his son, Marcus Chen Jr. Nancy's vision blurred. Everything Marcus had told her about his family's company, their wealth, their connections, all lies. And Anderson had known. had probably known from the beginning. We'll be restructuring the company and investigating all associated parties for potential criminal charges. Anderson's eyes met Nancy's again, and this time he smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, with the cold satisfaction of a man who'd won a war she hadn't known they were fighting. Anyone who benefited from the Chen family's fraudulent activities should expect to be contacted by our legal team. Security guards materialized beside Nancy like ghosts, their hands firm but professional on her arms. Someone had recognized her forged invitation, or maybe Anderson had simply had her name flagged in the system. Either way, she was being escorted out of the ballroom, again, while Anderson continued his speech to thunderous applause. As the doors closed behind her, Nancy caught one last glimpse of Anderson and Grace standing together on the stage, looking like the king and queen of an empire she'd foolishly believed didn't exist. She'd thrown away a billionaire for a bankrupt fraud, humiliated genuine love for a performance of wealth, and now she stood in a borrowed dress being removed from the palace she could have ruled. The champagne glass she dropped was still being swept up by staff as Nancy was deposited on the street outside, alone, broke, and finally understanding exactly what she'd lost. Nancy found herself being pulled backward by security, but she couldn't look away from the stage entrance where Anderson and Grace had disappeared. The sounds of the gala filtered through, applause dying down, the clink of champagne glasses, the murmur of conversations about stock prices and quarterly projections. She should go. The guard's hands on her arms suggested she didn't have a choice. But something made her twist free, stumble toward the side stage entrance where she could see through the curtain gap. "Ma'am, you need to leave." The security guard's voice was firm but not unkind, probably accustomed to dealing with desperate women at events like these. "Just let me watch," Nancy whispered. "Please. 1 minute." Maybe he pitied her. Maybe he just didn't want to drag a crying woman through the hallway. Either way, he let her stand there at the edge of the curtain while the lights came up on stage, brilliant and blinding. Anderson walked out first, and the applause was polite but reserved, the kind wealthy people gave to someone they respected but didn't yet adore. He moved to the microphone with that same unsettling confidence, like he'd been born on stages like this instead of in whatever working-class neighborhood he'd actually come from. Nancy still didn't know. Had never bothered to ask. "Thank you for your patience during this brief intermission," Anderson said, his voice carrying that easy authority that made Nancy's chest constrict. "Before we conclude tonight's celebration, I have one final introduction to make. One that's long overdue." He turned toward the wings, toward where Grace waited in her emerald gown, and extended his hand. She took it and walked onto the stage like she'd done it 1,000 times before, graceful and unhurried, smiling at the crowd with warmth that somehow didn't diminish her elegance. "Many of you know me as the chairman of Anderson Conglomerate," Anderson continued, his hand still holding Grace's. "But what you might not know is that the true architect of our success isn't me. It's my wife, Grace Reeves, CEO of Luminance Capital, the venture firm that seeded Anderson Conglomerate 15 years ago and has since built portfolios totaling $18 billion. The ballroom went silent. Then someone started clapping, and the applause built like a wave, genuine this time, impressed and slightly awed. Nancy's knees felt weak. Grace wasn't just Anderson's wife. She wasn't just the woman who'd settled for a manager making $70,000 a year. She was the kind of powerful Nancy had always pretended to want, the kind that came from building empires instead of marrying into them. "Grace doesn't seek publicity," Anderson said, looking at his wife with something that made Nancy want to claw her own eyes out, pride mixed with tenderness mixed with genuine partnership. "She prefers to let her investments speak for themselves. But tonight, as we celebrate this merger and the future of Anderson Conglomerate, I wanted to ensure everyone knows who the real power in the city is." He kissed Grace's hand, and she took the microphone with the ease of someone who'd commanded boardrooms while Nancy was still learning to apply eyeliner. "Thank you, Anderson," Grace said, her voice warm and professional. And thank you all for being here tonight. I'm looking forward to discussing our portfolio strategies at next week's summit. For those interested in Luminance Capital's approach to sustainable tech investments. Nancy stopped listening. The security guard's hand was on her arm again, gentler this time, guiding her away from the curtain, down the hallway, out the service door. She went without resistance because what was the point? She could hear Grace's voice following her, confident and articulate, discussing billions like Nancy discussed grocery budgets. The night air hit her face, cold and unforgiving. Behind her, through the walls of the ballroom, she could hear applause thundering for a woman who'd never needed to seduce anyone for power because she'd built her own empire before Nancy had even graduated college. Nancy stood on the curb in her borrowed dress, finally understanding that she hadn't just lost a boyfriend. She'd thrown away a billionaire for fraud, humiliated a chairman for a con artist, and rejected a partnership with the most powerful woman in the city because she'd been too shallow to see past a $70,000 salary. The champagne from earlier rose in her throat. Nancy turned away from the gala, away from the lights and the laughter and the life she'd destroyed, and walked into the darkness alone. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. Hit the subscribe button as I will be bringing more interesting stories. Turn on your notification because you would not want to miss my story for anything.